Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the PAL 15 podcast. My name is Werner Moison and I'm very happy to be joined today by another excellent guest out of the B2B industry, Eric Duerr. Welcome to our podcast. Let me give you a bit of an intro. B2B marketing, go-to-market strategist with over 20 years of experience. Helping tech companies like Pure Storage, Domo, Rocket Fuel define how they show up in the market. And you're currently VP of Strategy and Advisor to the CEO of Bentley. So another very interesting role. Welcome to the show and good to see you again.
Werner, so good to be here. So fun.
So Amsterdam and Park City joining up here. So exciting to talk to you about positioning of B2B tech companies. So curious, obviously you're very experienced in this space. As PAL 15, we obviously have been working with B2B tech as well, but very curious to hear from you what you've been seeing when it comes to positioning, differentiation over the last decade, but maybe even more over the last year, where we've seen a lot of companies focusing on AI, rethinking who they are, re-envisioning who they are, etc. So curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's we could do the whole podcast on that one question alone. And I mean, and it's funny, like in the last 10 years, I would say it's almost the same as the last 20 years or the last 30 years. I think it's just the way that often B2B marketers think about marketing, and specifically about how they think about positioning versus messaging. So my background has always been in positioning before messaging. And it's one of the reasons why I've loved working with you and Martin and the team, because you guys, there's not a lot of people who understand the difference between positioning and messaging. I see a lot of marketers getting out there and saying, hey, what are our three pillars? What are those core messages? How do we support those messages? And then make sure that those messages are consistent. So consistency. And the bummer is that that's absolutely not the correct way of doing things. If you don't understand your position, you have nothing to position against. And so it's like, well, so why do you stand and what do you stand for? And why does that matter? Which is very different from messaging. And so what I haven't seen change over the last 10 years, to answer your question, is I still see marketers tend to focus on messaging and not really get positioning.
Yeah. And I think that's also one of the things that we see a lot, right? So obviously the positioning part is not necessarily the CMO type of responsibility, or partly maybe. So therefore, I think your new role, right, VP of Strategy and Advisor to the CEO, is probably also a very interesting one, looking at that difference, right? The positioning and the messaging and the branding part.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So at Bentley Systems, I'll just give a quick example there. You know, we're a company, we're in the infrastructure space. So we build the software, the platforms for people who are building out the electrical grids, the roads, the bridges, water systems, all that stuff. And so you could imagine there's a lot there as far as, infrastructure allows 8 billion people on the planet to live, right? I mean, it is, all of us use it all the time. And so how do you take a position on it, right? What's our positioning different from a competitor's positioning? At a CEO level, you have to say, well, what are the things that we believe to be true? And one of the core beliefs we have is that the future of infrastructure is data. For something that lives in such a physical world, the way that it will become more resilient and last longer and be built better is through data. And then you just kind of follow that thread of that belief, and then you can get to some messaging and position, or you get into the messaging there. But if you don't have these core beliefs, these core themes, these core things that you can push up against, your messaging just sounds like everyone else. It just sounds. There's no reason why behind it.
Yeah, I recognize that. But if we would have to make it extremely tangible, right? Can we sort of almost break it down into 2-3 steps? Okay, how do you then get to that unique positioning part, right? Because like you said, right, if everyone is focusing on the messaging part, right? So we need a bit of Hollywood and sexy messaging to actually articulate our solutions. And You get almost like everyone is talking about the same thing, right? But if you take one step back, what are then the three things that companies or CEOs, CMOs, that whole partnership need to focus on to actually get it right, right? And build the right foundation, to make sure the messaging and everything you're going to do after works well.
Yeah. The first thing I tell everybody is marketers, and especially product marketers. I mean, product marketers are so important. Holy cow. Like you can, you have your thought leadership, you have your digital channels, but that product marketing group is carrying a lot of the load. And product marketing is such a funny, undefined discipline. And in fact, I will tell everyone pragmatic marketing, those types of institutions are great to send people to. So we have common definitions and roles and responsibilities of how that works when you try to go to market. With that said, a lot of product marketers spend a lot of time describing and not a lot of time prescribing, meaning they talk a lot about what is the thing they're trying to market rather than the reasons why you want to have it. And so my background, I went when I was at university, I studied rhetoric, mostly ancient Greek philosophy. And anyone who talks to me more than 8 seconds, I will bring up Aristotle, like the Aristotelian logic, the Socratic dialogue. And what we understand there is like marketing is simply the act of persuasion. And Aristotle will tell us persuasion is using any means necessary in a rhetorical situation to win the argument. So it's not necessarily what I believe is true. It's what do I need to convince you of in order to change your mind? And so a lot of marketing starts inside out and not thinking about how do I persuade you to see the world in my way. Okay, so you just start there. Like, let's start with argument theory. Then the next part is you look at it and say, what are the arguments for? And then what are the arguments against what I'm trying to tell you? And one of the things I think we forget about doing is we think about arguments for, well, I think they think benefits. Benefits isn't an argument. And then the argument against, well, we're a little bit soft on those. We'll say like, oh, here's our competitive intel or something like that. But that's not an argument against what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that's funny. So in a bit of a sort of different way, we're using the same, right? So we use this sort of 6 why model that sort of talks about the 6 whys in a sales process. And the first 2 that are often overlooked, talking about the inside out approach, is the why change and the why change now, right? So companies, especially B2B tech, or at least that's what we feel, are too eager to actually talk about, hey, this is what we deliver, this is what we built, this is what we can do, instead of sort of creating that sense of urgency at the customer side, right? So why do you actually want to change? And why not change in a year from now, but why change now, right? Because that, in the end, determines the question why a company should invest now.
The biggest challenge you have is to why change, because the argument against is why do anything?
Yeah, exactly.
and kind of like not so to improve something is to change it, but to change it doesn't necessarily mean you improve it. But change is always a source of fear. And this is where people who buy technology, and especially if you're the person signing the line saying, hey, I'm going to go buy this. Well, you have to not only convince your internal stakeholders that this is an improvement, but you have to get over their fear of the change, even if the current situation sucks. So just by going through and saying, hey, this is better, and it has an ice cream button and even a teleporter, you have to be able to articulate the pain of that organization to the point of that staying the same isn't an option, but is better, that I still have to overcome the fear that I'm going to introduce into my organization by change.
Yeah.
And that's why, honestly, that's why a lot of innovation, a lot of progress doesn't happen. It's not because we don't know what we need to go do. It's just that it's easier to wait till next quarter.
Yeah. Exactly. And is this specific to the B2B tech space, you feel, or do you see this everywhere? And the reason why I'm asking is because we We went through some Gartner research, right? And you clearly see that there are a couple of blind spots for CEOs in this space, right? So if you look at some of the activities that they do and actually the impact that it makes, right? You see all of the companies in this space focusing on the actual executional bit, right? But the whole positioning part, the segmentation part, and the, well, like we talked about, the messaging bit is often overlooked, whilst that has the highest impact on the result or the change that companies are after. Do you see that across the board, or are we just too isolated, too focused on the B2B space?
No, it's across the board. I think, Chris Capicella, he used to be the CMO at Microsoft, and he always said, strategy is determining what you don't do, and the hardest thing a CEO or a head of sales is going to go do is say, we're not going to go into this market. We're not going to sell to these people. And particularly, it depends on where you are in the stage of growth of your company. But it takes a lot of maturity and a lot of guts to say, we're not going to go sell to them. And I think the reason why people don't do that is, number one, it's just hard to say no when you're in a growth mindset. And number two is people haven't done the long division on what's the true cost of that business. And so we all know that revenue today doesn't mean profit tomorrow. When I was at Pure Storage, we did a lot of work into segmentation modeling, LTV, the CAC, like the whole kit and caboodle. And it was like really interesting to see, well, where were the profitable segments and where weren't they? And the data just was different than what we thought was true. There are some people who are like, we told you so. We've been saying so. But as we're putting the go-to-market strategy, it's like, holy cow. Like, and then you look at like, okay, well, where are those repeatable, who are those repeatable segments? And this is true in B2B, B2C, it doesn't really matter. And then back to that positioning, are we positioned the right way for that person? Because often what happens is your segmentation has changed over time. And you see this all the time. You get a startup founder who's amazing. She sold her business to investors. She sold it into the first accounts. And then they bring in and they have their pitch, and then they expand the team, and then they have head of sales, and then suddenly their segmentation target has changed, but they haven't changed the argument of why. And so maybe, that'll work for a little bit, but you have to go deconstruct, again, back to Aristotle, for this rhetorical situation over here with this particular buyer for this particular need in this particular moment. What is the best arguments for and against? And I don't care if you're, in B2B or B2C, people tend not to be willing to change their positioning because, hey, Werner, it worked before.
Yeah.
Or what they do, this is even worse. They say, we're going to do it. They get it. And then sales is like, I'm going to just keep, like, sales is where messaging goes to die. Like that's, they like, you can do all the hard work and they're going to be like, you know what? I get it, but I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. My existing pitch still works.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And by the way, it still kind of does work. I play, it's so funny. I play a lot of tennis and, I'm not pro, yet, maybe. But it's so funny. You can do a serve and maybe you'll even get an ace. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm an amazing server. But I video and I look back and I'll look at those serves. Oh God. Like, how did that ball even go in? Like, I thought I was like Federer, like coming in, but no, my hand was like, so it's that saying, like, even a blind squirrel will find an acorn. Even a bad message will land a sale. And then we just say, well, that worked. I think to remedy that, back to your earlier question, like, what are some specific things that people can do is, and we've talked about this before. I've, with some of my colleagues who also have a nerdy philosophy background, we talk about the 3Ds. And those Ds are how you think about positioning. And so the first D is this disruptive? What's the claim I'm making? And is that claim disruptive? And what I mean by that, does it make the person I'm trying to sell into think about their world differently? The second one is differentiation. So how different is that versus what other people are saying out in the market? And then the third one is defensibility. So can I prove it? So what I suggest people to do is to say, write out a list of not features, not benefits, but reasons why. What are the arguments for your offer or for your company, whatever level you're going to be at? So you write those out, and they have to be, real reasons. It can't be my favorite reason, by the way, the worst. And I love this one. I'll say like, oh, what's another reason? People say, our people. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so good. Because that's so bad. Like it's not defensible. Like it's just not like everyone has people. And you can say like, oh, my kid is smarter than your kid. It just, everyone's going to have that. But you look for reasons why, and then you score it. And what we like to do is we score it 1 to 5. So 5 being very disruptive, 1 being not. And then you go through it and say, okay, well, how disruptive is this? Like this claim, does this really make someone rethink their business? Number 2, is it differentiated? Can we, and by the way, this has nothing to do with truth. And I've been in, messaging workshops and positioning workshops where people say like, oh, well, they say that, but it's not true. I was like, well, you're mistaking truth with argument.
Yeah.
Is it categorically different than what other people are claiming on a scale of 5 to 1? And then the final one is, how do we prove it? And so if you're going to defend it, you can only defend it a few different ways. It's not magic. It's going to be customer evidence is a big way. Like someone saying like, yes, this is true. It is faster, or whatever. Analysts, like a third party, like Gartner or a Forrester or some sort of analyst saying, yep, right, Magic Quadrant, they did this, they did that. A partner would be some sort of external thing, or it might be actually a feature, a feature data point. Like ours is just, my car is faster than your car. Here's the data, right? But what's interesting is if you look at those 3 things, is it disruptive? Is it differentiated? And is it defensible? It is the most revealing thing to see in a planning session, because you'll figure out that everything is not aligned. So you'll hear sales say like, this is what we come in and we say, and it's amazing. And it captures people's attention. It's like, well, how do you prove it? Oh, we don't. Do you have case studies? Well, we have case studies, but the case studies have nothing to do with what we're saying. And right there, it's like, okay, well then how do we align right here? We have if we agree that these are the strongest arguments we have, that this should be our customer evidence plan for the year. That's it. Like if we can't go get a customer to publicly agree with the argument we're making, maybe that argument isn't real. Right. So maybe we should stop using that one. Yeah. So that's a construct. I find it very helpful. It's a rigorous exercise. But then the next thing you come do is you say, okay, now let's make the argument against every one of those claims. And then let's score that on how well do we think a competitor could knock us out. And then that's like another layer. So you're bringing some sort of methodology to this. And then you can take a step back and say, wow, out of this groups, and we ran this with sales, we ran it with product, we ran it with marketing, we ran it with the exec teams. What were the strongest arguments that we scored? And then kind of see how that feels in your positioning and messaging.
And then back to your example, right? So the lady, the example you gave, that actually started the business, sold the business, but didn't want to change, right? So if we look at this exercise, is there a way to literally bake it into a company's behavior, right? So how often would you have to block time for such a session, right? To just sort of say, hey, wait a sec, are we still following the right story, right? Do we see sort of trends in the market? World is, again, right, we're in the tech space, so everything is changing so fast, right? So is this like a quarterly exercise that you would recommend? Or, I mean, you have been working at some great tech companies, right? Great question.
Yeah, it depends on at what level you're going to do it. If you're doing it at a corporate strategy level or corporate brand level, obviously you're going to want to have that, not a quarterly basis. Even with how fast things change, your core argument shouldn't have to change about why your company should matter. But like an annual refresh is a great place to do.
Yeah.
A lot of these others is you're going to be involved in your launch process. I always find it like a great question to ask somebody is how do you take a product to market? And just get your pen out, and it will tell you everything about that company if you just ask that one question. And so if you're not doing this hard work at the right time, you will introduce these products or these offers, whatever it is, in a way that doesn't make the best argument for you. And so this is something you should bake into launch process. And also like get into the corporate calendaring. So for example, a lot of companies, we did this, like Adobe did this method. Back in the day, I had an agency and we ran this with Adobe. We ran it twice a year. We ran it right before Adobe Summit because we were on the digital marketing side. So we ran it then, and then we ran it at mid-year training. And the reason why we did it at mid-year training is because ideally sales has been out for 6 months selling. And then you bring them back into mid-year training and you have it. And you're saying, what were the arguments that worked? And then you're getting that market sensing back. So you need that signal. And then, you can do some training with them, and then you refresh the packaging, and the positioning. And then that will help you into the next 6 months, get to your large annual meeting. Right. So it's not necessarily like how often, but it's like, what's the workflow? What's the ebb and flow with your market sensing, your launch? If you're a company that's, if you're SaaS and you're just launching, all the time, you're going to need to do it sooner. If you're in larger enterprise go to market, you don't need to do it as much. But it's just whatever your workflow is and how you get that market sensing back and forth.
Yeah. Great. Well, this has been great. Also looking a bit at time, if listeners or viewers should remember one single thing from this episode about positioning, what should it be in your view?
Read Aristotle. But it's true. Just remember that positioning is the argument against something else. It is not clean messaging. It is, what is my position on whatever I'm trying to sell or whatever marketplace I'm in against somebody else's. You cannot position if you aren't positioning against something. And it might be, you'll see a lot of people position against, old ways of working. They're going to position against unclean data. They're going to position against whatever, right? But if you don't have clarity of what that positioning is, then there's no way to talk about the thing in a very interesting way. A great way of thinking about positioning is if you look at political preferences. Like if you're going to talk about in the U.S. Second Amendment rights, you're not going to talk about what is the Second Amendment. You're going to talk about my position against your position. Like that's how we naturally do this when we're trying to convince and we try to have arguments. We don't spend time describing the thing. We spend time showing where we are positioned against your position. It's the easiest way to think about it. And again, I think people spend a lot more time describing, like, this is my pen. It's a beautiful pen. It's, it's like, that's not what positioning is. If you do not do positioning, then your messaging has to work a lot harder. And the way your messaging is going to work a lot harder is by putting more dollars behind your media and more dollars into your sales motion. So you can either, it's like tequila. You can pay for it today or you can pay for it tomorrow. Right? Like it's better to put the money up front and make that investment because you're going to see more efficiency in your media spend. You're going to find better performance out of all your product marketing assets. Your salespeople are going to be able to go in and move with confidence and reclassify the argument you're trying to make. Often, and if you're a challenger brand, you'll make arguments that ironically are the leader in that category's best argument. And so you need to watch out that you're not making an argument for your competitor. Right. So if you say like, hey, you need the best, most secure and fastest one of these, and then but that's what your competitor's saying, then, and they have halo, they have brand halo, suddenly your marketing is actually doing you a disservice.
Yeah.
So if you don't invest in positioning today, you better be able to spend a lot of money and a lot of hope in your digital and sales channels.
Yeah. This has been great, Eric. I'm pretty sure that we can, like we said, spend another 15 or 30 or 45 minutes on this. So that will be for next episode. But for today, this is all the time that we have. Eric, thanks for joining. Very inspiring and good to hear from, such an experienced guy about positioning, the challenges, and what you need to think of when you're in B2B tech. As ever, of course, also thanks to our listeners, to our viewers. If you want to listen to more episodes, you will find them available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts soon. For more information about PAL15, go to our website, pal15.com. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Werner.